I am an idiot. Let me just start there. I am an idiot, and so I lost the outdated version of the Iceberg that I'm using. So I have to use the updated one. What's the problem with that? Well, full transparency, my intention was to keep using the outdated one, and then in a supercut of all the parts together, talk about the new entries in it so there's some new content in that. But that's not happening anymore, so let's just do this. I'll talk about what's new in the first 3 layers when I get to the end of the Iceberg in 2025 or however long it takes. That might be a generous estimation. And again, content warning, there will be potentially disturbing subject matter and potentially unsettling on-screen visuals. If you aren't comfortable with that, then please pay attention to the name of the videos you click on. And for YouTube's advertisement review team, this video is being made entirely with educational purposes, so please don't shoot it down. By the way, this is layer 4, so let's get going. There's about 112 entries or so on this layer, so I'm most certainly gonna have to split this in half. Raymond Robinson. Hated it from the moment I heard the name. That's a joke most of you won't get. Raymond Theodore Robinson actually is the story of a man who became an urban legend. At the age of 8, Ray was injured while climbing a pole to reach a bird's nest on the Morton Bridge. Now this bridge carried trolleys, and when Raymond was climbing and came into contact with an electrical wire, you can imagine what happened. Thankfully, despite another child having died a year prior to the same wire, Ray actually survived. However, Ray was severely disfigured, having lost both of his eyes, his nose, and his right arm. Following this disfigurement, Ray went on to spend most of his life making doormats, belts, and wallets to sell, but would also often go out at night for long walks on State Route 351. Ray was blind, obviously, so he'd use a walking stick to feel his way through, and would also often hide away from his neighbours, only occasionally coming out to speak with them or take photos. By the end of his life, he retired to Beaver County Geriatric Center and passed at the age of 74. As a result of his nightly walks and unusual appearance, he ended up becoming an urban legend in the Pittsburgh area. Known either as the Green Man, as it was believed he had green skin from the electrical shock, or as Charlie No Face because most of his face was gone. The legends can vary. Some say he fell into a vat of acid, some say he was struck by lightning, some say he's a ghost, but it's all kind of just nonsense. Truth is, Raymond was a real man who suffered a horrific accident at a young age, and from what we know, his family reported that Ray was a good man. He loved to listen to the radio, he collected metal puzzles, and he helped his family basically every day. His family hated and resented the names given to Ray by others. They disliked when they would give him alcohol, causing him to get drunk and lose his way, and they'd often go looking for him if he didn't return home before 12 during his nightly walks. But all this has been kind of dismissed by time, as the legend of Charlie No Face has long outlived the man and sadly overshadowed and glorified the truth of the matter. The Circleville Letters. Depending on where you stand, this is either a strange mystery that is yet to be solved, or a case of people looking for a deeper mystery when there isn't one. Circleville is a place in Ohio, a city in fact, and that's all I have to say about the place itself. Our story begins in 1976 when a bunch of people started receiving anonymous threatening letters telling them that they'd be in danger or get blackmailed if they don't comply with what the writer wanted. The most notable person to receive a letter that you'll hear about was Mary Gillespie. I'm hoping that's how it's said. The letter told her that if she did not tell her husband of the affair she was having with the superintendent of a school, that something bad would happen. Naturally, Mary ignored this letter, and the letter after that as well, and then her husband Ron got a letter too. These letters came from Columbus, Ohio, by the way. That'll probably matter in a moment. Of course, Mary and Ron did the smart thing and did not go to the police. One day, Ron would get a phone call, which just, oh man, it peeved him something fierce. We don't really know what happened in that call, but he went out to confront the person writing the letters with a gun, drove off with his pickup truck, and minutes later, he was dead. His truck had crashed into a tree and he'd died on impact, and yet, his gun was found to have fired 1 round. Now here we get our first oddity. Obviously, when you hear that, you think foul play has to be involved, and the sheriff thought so too. Until he did a 180 and changed his mind saying that Ron was drunk and lose control. But Ron's family said that he didn't drink. So letters just kept going across Ohio, and then comes the next oddity. Mary one day would find billboards all over the place, and decides to rip out one of these billboards. And then what she finds is that there was a box with a gun inside, very poorly rigged with the intention of shooting her if she pulled the sign down. But thankfully she wasn't blown to hell. They were able to identify who the gun belonged to, a man named Paul Freshaw, and he was sent into prison, solitary confinement for 7 to 20 plus years. Good job guys, you got the guy. Except plot twist, the letters kept getting sent all over the place. And you know where Paul was not? In Columbus, Ohio, where the letters came from, and also he was in prison. Obviously at this point they let him go, because, well, he isn't a superhuman with the power to shoot letters out like a C-list Batman villain. But no, you'd be wrong if you thought that. Paul was kept in prison. Hell, he was denied parole once because he sent these letters. And then Paul also got letters as well, but that's not important. It was only long after that Paul was free, and then he died. The year he was set free, it turns out that a show called Unsolved Mysteries found a witness who made herself available but was never called up to testify. She had seen a man standing by a yellow car at the scene of Mary's near shooting. So that leaves us with the question, is there a mystery here? Or was Paul Freshaw the guy? Well, yeah, there's probably a mystery here. How exactly is a man supposed to smuggle hundreds of letters out of solitary confinement and have them sent to Columbus to then get sent out to the rest of Ohio? Of course, it is possible that Paul was one of multiple people responsible. That's always a very possible theory, but who knows, this whole case is kinda weird. Isdal woman. This entry refers to an unidentified woman who was found deceased on November 29th of 1970 by a man and his 2 daughters. Noticing a burning smell, they found the woman dead and charred amongst the rocks of Isdalen, a place notorious for people having thrown themselves to hell during the Middle Ages. Immediately, the police came to investigate the scene, and obviously it was quite odd. The woman didn't appear to be a hiker and was in a very unusual place, and of course, she had been charred for quite a while, meaning fire was involved. At the scene, police found jewelry, a watch, some bottles, and a broken umbrella, but notably, they also found that she wasn't wearing or holding any of them, but they were placed around her body. Forensic investigator Tom Redbones, which is how that's pronounced, said that the placement and location was indicative of some kind of ceremony. She was also wearing a lot of synthetic material clothes, with production labels cut off as to make identifying her as hard as possible. Without a real name, the placeholder name of Isdal Woman was given to her, and she was described as around 5'4" and between the ages of 25 and 40. The case exploded, and soon more evidence would arrive in the form of 2 suitcases found at the Bergen railway station, one of which contained prescription-free glasses with fingerprints that matched the woman's. The case also included some clothes, wigs, cash, and other stuff, all of which also had their labels and identifying features removed. Again, as if something didn't want her to be identified. But there was one thing, a plastic bag that led them to a footwear store where the owner's son was able to confirm selling the exact boots found in the Isdal woman to her, leading them to St. Svithun Hotel, where she was finally identified as Fenella Lorch. Except, as it turned out, the woman had stayed in multiple hotels in Norway, all under different names, meaning she was also identified as Genevieve Lancia, Claudia Tielt, Claudia Nielsen, Alexia van Merches, Vera Jal, and Elizabeth Lienhoff, none of which were her actual name. Presumably. This didn't really lead anywhere. They learned a few more facts about her, like that she both spoke English and a bit of German, and was apparently quite elegant, but that was about it. By that point, the only logical theory was left that she was a spy. Supposedly, there were reports around that she'd been observing military tests that fueled the flames. A coded note was found in the suitcases mentioned earlier, but when it was cracked, it didn't really offer much, just a record of places she had visited. But why was it coded? At the same time, the autopsy of the body was going on, and had found that she had been bruised on the right side of her neck, and that she was alive while she was burning. Combined with petrol being found near her, something was up. She was also found with over 50 sleeping pills in her stomach and a ton of carbon monoxide in her blood. At that point, her death was ruled as self-inflicted. She was buried in February of 1971, given a Catholic funeral, and placed within a zinc coffin that would not decompose. And that's what the case remains today. Or it would have if it had not been reopened in 2016. Oh yeah, it's back. You see, there are a few other things I haven't mentioned. The case is nuts. There's her distinctive teeth, 14 of which were filled and with gold crowns, unusual to see in Norway at the time. They were kept in case someone could identify the dental work, and the woman's lower jaw was brought for isotopic analysis, along with other tissue samples that were kept of the woman back in the 1970s. And through that, a DNA profile was able to be made for the woman. Now we know she was born in around the 1930s, around Nuremberg, Germany, but then moved somewhere around France as a child, and a few other things. To this day, we still don't know who she is, but we are inching closer. And maybe, just maybe, one day, there's some hope we'll identify who the woman really is, be it a spy, a sex worker, or whatever. Elaine Moore Lighthouse Keepers. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse is unsurprisingly a lighthouse, near the highest point of Eilean Moor off the west coast of Scotland. On the offset, it seems like a pretty normal place, and you're probably right. But 1 year after its construction in 1900, a steamship known as the Arctur noticed something a bit abnormal. This lighthouse was not doing the light thing. Quite unusual because it was very dark at the time and the weather wasn't great either. The crew of the ship was quite confused, and as it turned out, soon everyone else would be too. After the Arctur alerted people, a ship Hesperus was sent to investigate, though it took a few days due to bad weather. When they arrived, nothing. The lighthouse was manned by 3 men, and yet none of them could be seen. None of them could be alerted by horn or by flare. Nothing. Worried about potential pirates, the captain sent one man, Joseph Moore, alone to investigate. The gate was closed, the lighthouse was closed, beds were unmade, and clocks unwound. 2 of the 3 coats were missing, and all 3 of the men that should have been there were also gone. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur were all missing. Moore and 3 others were left on the island to man the lighthouse while Hesperus left. They were also to look for any evidence or clues to what might have happened, and they found several things. Destroyed island railings, a destroyed crate with content for manning the lighthouse, and a 1-ton rock had also been moved, as well as some grass. An investigation obviously conducted for quite some time, where evidence eventually led to the conclusion that the men had been on duty until they were swept up by a wave while trying to secure the crate, and they were just taken away by it. Theories are rampant from what might have happened, just ignoring that conclusion. Could have been pirates, it could have been sea monsters, murder amongst the men. Stories of logbooks that later turned out to be fake were additions to the legend, but to this day, we don't know for sure. But if you ask me, I think the evidence speaks for itself. It was probably aliens. The Dawn is your enemy. The Dawn is your enemy refers to a sign-off bump used by Cartoon Network between 2005 and 2010, meant to scare children away from watching the channel. It's basically what you're seeing right now. Also not that crazy, just a bit unsettling. It's a sign-off bumper. But then came a creepypasta that actually, sometimes, when you found it coming on, there'd be sounds of real people screaming, and the sun winking, oh, spooky! But yeah, the sun doesn't wink, that's not a thing, it's just kind of just a creepypasta about something somewhat unusual. The Killing Stone. To talk about this, it's time to go back to ancient Japan. Japan has 3 beings known as the 3 Great Evils. The first is Shuten Doji, a legendary Oni who suffered from an Oni mask fusing to his face, forced to live as a hermit, and then grew to hate the world as he was shunned. The second varies, either the Tengu Emperor Sutoku, or the Majino Takemaru. I personally go with Otakemaru, as Emperor Sutoku can go with the 3 great Tengu. And the third is the Kitsune Tamamo no Mae. A wicked shapeshifter and 9-tailed fox, Tamamo disguised herself as a human child and tricked an elderly couple into raising her by the name Mikuzune. Mikuzune grew to be beautiful and talented, offered a job at the imperial court at the age of 7. She excelled in court, she knew everything, and everyone who saw her fell in love because they were all nonces. One summer night, a rainstorm blew out all the candles in the area, and a light emanated from Mikuzune, bringing others to believe she had a good and holy past life, and she was given the name Tamamo no Mae and made into the consort of Emperor Toba. But suspiciously, the Emperor's health began to decline, and suspicion fell on Tamamo. She was brought to perform the holy ritual to save the Emperor's life, as if she was truly an evil spirit like she was suspected, she wouldn't be able to recite the holy words. Forced into this, she performed her duty until the last moment when she disappeared. 80,000 men were sent to find her by the angered Emperor. Tamamo sent a dream to the archer Miura Nosuke, begging him to spare her. But he refused, and when he found her the next day, he fired 2 arrows, one in her neck and one in her side, and later her head was cleaved off by a man named Kazusa Nosuke, ending her life. But in a later telling, separate from the original, it was stated that actually Tamamo had embedded herself into a stone by the name of Sesho Seki, until the Buddhist monk Geno Shinso exorcised the now repentant Tamamo and held a ceremony that she would rest in peace. This rock is identified as the Killing Stone, and is a real rock. It's a rock! So in March of 2022, the rock identified as a Sesho Seki fucking broke in half, and we don't know why. Some consider it a bad omen with how screwed the world is, and some say it's a good omen as the repentant Tamamo has come to help us. But at the end of the day, the story concludes with a goddamn rock breaking in half. Rat Kings. The Rat King is a popular antagonist originating from the 4th issue of the 1987 Mirage Comics Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles run, but that's not important. Rat Kings refers to a bunch of rats who have tangled their tails together to become a super rat. What? So Rat Kings, despite superstition, are apparently a real thing, where rats get tangled together. Here's 32 of them. It usually happens when rats are forced to live in cramped environments and get stuck, or if it's cold and they tangle themselves together to stay huddled and warm and just go too far. However, as it turns out, no, because rats are perfectly capable of untying themselves. They will even gnaw off their own tail for survival. So how can these specimens exist? Well, they're fake, of course. And so the debate cues between if Rat Kings are real, fake, if it happens in the wild, or if you have to force it in captivity, and at the end of the day, who gives a shit? It's a bunch of rats tied up together by their tails. Hana up. Well, we've gone about a few minutes without a woman disappearing. Time to correct that with a woman who has disappeared 3 times. Obviously, 2 of those times she was found, but unfortunately the 3rd time, not so much. Hannah is believed to have been a sufferer of dissociative fugue, wherein a person will suffer memory loss and forget often who they are and what they're doing. The first time, Hannah went out on a jog when she suddenly vanished. Initially believed murdered, Hannah was spotted in an Apple store 9 days later. When asked if she was Hannah, she said no, and walked away. Another 11 days later, she was found floating near Robin's Reef. She had no idea what had happened, she was dehydrated, suffering hypothermia, and was extremely confused. For her, it was like only 10 minutes had passed. A few years after that, she would disappear again. She was living in Maryland, where her purse and cell phone were found on a trail, and she was just missing. This time it thankfully only took a few days, and she recovered from the fugue state before anyone could find her. Unfortunately, that then leads us to the 3rd disappearance that occurred in 2017. This time, Hannah disappeared in St. Thomas, a few days after a hurricane had hit. She was last seen leaving her home at 8 AM, all the way to this day, never seen again. Her sandals, dress, and car keys were found on the stool of a bar, and her passport and wallet and phone were in her car in the parking lot. But beyond that, we don't know where she is, and we don't have any leads. Jennifer Fairgate. You might think this is a disappearance, but thankfully it's not. Do not worry. It's just a dead woman we don't know the name of again. Jennifer Fairgate, or Fairgate, was a woman fluent in German and English who was found dead in the Oslo Plaza Hotel in Norway. She booked a room for 3 days on the 31st of May 1995 and gave her name as Jennifer Fairgate, along with a few other false details about herself. She also checked a Louis Fairgate into the room with her, but nobody was seen with her, and she had only ever been seen with a man aged between 25 and 40 in her room who has never been identified. But that's not the only bizarre thing around this case. Jennifer seemingly was absent from her room for 2 entire days and was only seen leaving the room once. A member of the cleaning staff entered her room and found it completely clean, with a pair of high heels that promptly vanished. She also attempted to contact 2 invalid numbers during her stay. The day before her demise, Jennifer put the Do Not Disturb sign on her room's door handle, and remained there through to the next day when she didn't check out. Instead, everyone heard a gunshot when the staff knocked on the door. For some reason, the room was unsupervised for 15 minutes after that, and the police took 50 minutes to arrive. Jennifer was found covered in blood in a bed, shot in the head. She was holding a gun, so naturally it was assumed to be a self-performed deed. However, the gun was upside down, and there was no blood or gunshot residue on her hand, and the door was locked from the inside as well. In the room was a key, believed to have been given to the mysterious Louis Fairgate. Suspiciously, there was a man identified as Mr. F in the room opposite Jennifer's, and apparently he told authorities that Jennifer was found dead, but he also checked out before she was found dead, and has never been located. That's not all that's bizarre. The gun was found to have been fired twice, once into a pillow as seemingly a test fire, and once when, it went through her head. There was a clone for men found in her room, and all the labels and identifying elements on her belongings were removed. So that leaves us with 4 questions. Who is Jennifer Fairgate? Who is Louis Fairgate? Who is Mr. F? And what really was the situation around Jennifer's death? One big theory is that Jennifer was a secret agent who was tracked down and assassinated. Removing tags from clothing is a common practice with secret agents, according to Norwegian intelligence officer Ola Kaladga, when interviewed for Unsolved Mysteries, and the way the door was locked could have been done by someone who knew what they were doing as well. But that's just one big theory. We might never know what happened, and these mysteries might just be something that time has left behind. Chip Chan. Chip Chan refers to an unidentified South Korean girl who was found on a live webcam. That on its own is weird, but people watching this live stream came to find that her behavior was very strange. From 2009 onwards, Chip Chan had been live streaming 24/7, usually just on her computer or sleeping most of the time. She'd only ever leave to get groceries. But the really weird stuff can be seen on her blog. On her blog, Chip Chan claimed that she was being held captive by a corrupt police officer named P, who had implanted a chip into her ankle that monitors her, can make her fall asleep, and is probably why people call her Chip Chan. She said she was afraid to contact the police, as P might find out about it. Despite this, it's also believed that P is the one who even set these cameras up in the first place. She would live stream on a YouTube account known as Mind Control Weapon, or Control Weapon Mind, but stopped in 2020, and now uploads videos that I will elect not to show you because most of it is her legs with scabs and stuff on them, which I'm sure most of you don't want to see. Chip Chan also has shown herself actively outside more often, stalking South Korean police. So of course that leads to the questions of, what is this all about? Some say she's a troll, which I think is very unlikely because live streaming for 10 years for the sake of an internet prank is completely improbable. There's a theory that she is telling the truth, that there is a mind control weapon in her foot that controls her entirety, which I guess is not impossible, sure. However, Chip Chan claims what's in her foot is a Verichip, A Verichip is a commercially produced identification chip that can be injected just under someone's skin, used for biometric verification, often used to help identify John and Jane Does. But then there's the most plausible theory, that Chip is suffering from some form of paranoid schizophrenia, and that P is a healthcare agent, and that her paranoia is perpetuated by the responses she gets online to all of her videos and streams. However, she has never been properly diagnosed from what I can find, so that is still just speculation as to what she is suffering. There's really no solid answers or endings I can give you for this. We still don't honestly know a whole lot. South Korea is a place where mental health isn't really cared for very much. Mental health discussion in Korea is considered something of a taboo apparently, and there isn't much for someone in South Korea to go to for help with their mental health problems. So that's where that ends, and I don't really know how else to finish the segment off, so the Setagaya family massacre. Oh, joy. On the nights of December 30 and 31st in the year 2000, the Miyazawa family in Setagaya, Tokyo were murdered in a home invasion that remains unsolved. Mikio Miyazawa, his wife Yasuko, and their children Rei and Nina were all killed by a yet unknown assailant. An assailant who remained in the house for a few hours and then vanished forever. The killer entered the house through an open window in the second floor bathroom, and strangled 6-year-old Rei in his bed while he was sleeping. Mikio heard a disturbance in the room and rushed upwards, where he fought against the killer until he was murdered with a knife stabbed into the back of his head. The police report claimed that part of the knife's blade broke off in the back of his head, and not long after, the killer went after the 41-year-old Yasuko and her 8-year-old daughter, and killed them both with a Santoku knife. For up to potentially 10 hours, the killer remained in the house, drank 4 bottles of tea and had some ice cream, used the family computer, treated his wounds, took a nap, and used the toilet, with money taken from the house and drawers ransacked, and with 10 items left behind on the family sofa. That's a lot of stuff. The family was found dead when Yasuko's mother Haruko was suspicious of being unable to contact her daughter, as the killer had disconnected the phone line, and she came to visit the house at around 1 AM. Now, what's insane about this is that there's so much evidence left behind. There is a ridiculous amount of evidence we have for a case like this, and it remains unsolved. Gloves, shoes, a bag, handkerchiefs, and multiple clothing items were left at the scene from the killer. There was even a bandage which seemingly included the killer's blood on it, and a towel with the killer's blood on it. Blood, feces, and saliva from the killer were all left at the house, and yet we got nothing. Now there are also some oddities. When I say the killer entered through the open window, that is technically just speculation. The window was found open, however there were no linen fibers found on the window, but there were also shoe impressions found outside the house under the window, though it has been argued the window could have also been used as an escape point instead of an entry point. That leads to the dark implication that the killer was an acquaintance of the family who was let in, trusted, and killed them. This is somewhat supported by the fact that footprints were found going up the staircase but not back down, which means that it's possible the killer took his shoes off after walking up the stairs, which would make it very strange if he came in through the window, took off his shoes, went down the stairs, put them on, walked back up, and then took them off. But this theory as well has problems with it, as it would flip the order of the murders, which has a whole load of issues. Now, police were able to use the DNA at the scene of the crime to identify the killer's age range, blood type, height, hair color, and length, and his sweater was found to have been so rare that only 130 were ever made and only 10 were ever sold in Tokyo. But still, nothing. A man was seen running from the house according to a witness, but this was dismissed due to lack of footprints or blood found on the street. But a train station worker said that a man got treatment for an arm and a hand wound, one that was so bad that his bones could even be seen through it. And security camera footage caught the man when he was purchasing the knife used in the murder. Also, sand was found in the man's bag that originated from a military Air Force base in the US. Huh? And somehow, despite the case still being open to this day, with over 250 investigators having been involved, with 12,000 pieces of evidence, we don't know who did it. And it's really kind of insane how much evidence we have. In most cases, just having the DNA of the killer at the scene would make it an easy solve, but this one, not this time. Unsinkable Sam. Unsinkable Sam is a nickname given to a cat who supposedly served during World War II. That is a sentence that just sounds completely wrong to what it was intended, and survived 3 ships sinking. The actual name of this cat is unknown, but he was reportedly given the name of Oscar and was of German origin. A black and white cat, he was seen supposedly on the German Bismarck when it sunk, where he was found and brought above the HMS Cossack, which also blew up. Then he was brought aboard the HMS Ark Royal, hilariously one of the ships responsible for blowing the Bismarck to hell. And then it got torpedoed, and supposedly Sam survived this too. At this point, people realized maybe it's just a bad omen to bring him onto a ship and stop doing that. Now, we can't really confirm any of these stories. There are two completely different cats whose pictures have been identified as Sam. And in the most detailed account of the Bismarck sinking we have, no cat is ever mentioned. But yeah, who knows. But this is a nice detail from the Depression. Robert Liston. Robert Liston is a man who I have memed with my buddy Huand ever since we read his story. The story of a surgeon who was literally the Flash and also killed his patient and two bystanders at the same time at once. Robert Liston is the GOAT who performed an epic surgery with a 300% mortality rate. I bet that got your attention. So this man was alive in the 1800s, and he performed surgeries in the days before anesthesia. So, to perform surgeries, what surgeons had to do was go really fast. Robert was known as the fastest knife in the West. So fast with his surgeries that while the average surgeon might have lost 1 in 10 patients, Robert only lost 1 in 4. This man could perform a leg amputation in 2.5 minutes, damn! Before every surgery, this man would tell his assistants to time him. He was literally speed running surgery. But one time, he performed a surgery so epic that while he failed the any percent surgery speed run, he did succeed in hitting the high score in surgery mortality. He cut off his surgical assistant's fingers and clipped the spectator's coattails while swinging his knife back up. The assistant and the patient died of infections from their wounds, while the spectator, get this, died of fright. Wow! Robert was also the first man to perform a surgery with anesthesia, and you know what? It worked out. I know this entry kind of focuses on his legendary fuck-up, but he was genuinely a very accomplished and important surgeon of his time, and should be remembered more for that. Still, I'm going to meme the fact that this guy speedruns surgery with collateral damage. Look, it's been 200 years, I don't think this is a too soon situation. People meme the commander of the Third Reich and his Mike-related illnesses, okay? Otto Warmbier. Oh, fucking North Korea case. Please don't disappear me. Okay, we're gonna be quick. Vladimir Komarov. Vladimir Mikhailovich Komarov was a Soviet test pilot, and the first human to die on a spaceflight. Vladimir was commander of the Voskhod 1, the first spaceflight to carry multiple crew members, and he was the first Soviet cosmonaut to fly more than once into space when he was a solo pilot of the Soyuz 1. It was on this second flight that he died. April 24th, 1967, the craft on the way up was meant to open with 2 solar panels, but only one actually opened, leaving the craft starving for power and the manual controls compromised. Soyuz 2 was intended to be sent out to help repair Soyuz 1, but thunderstorms left that impossible. Vladimir orbited Earth 18 times and decided to activate the retro rockets to start the descent back down to Earth. But the parachutes intended to slow down the descent of the craft completely failed to deploy, so he crashed at a ridiculous speed. Would you believe it, he died. Yellowstone Hot Springs deaths. I bet you'll never guess what this is about. Yellowstone's Norris Geyser Basin is responsible for over 22 deaths. It's a park built on top of a supervolcano, home to 10,000 hydrothermal vents and half the world's geysers. So hot that they could kill you in no time if you were to fall in. Scalding had been common since at least the 1870s, with the first reported death occurring in 1890 from a 7-year-old falling into a hot spring. There have been over 20 more deaths since then. Word of advice, don't go there, just don't. The 1970 monkey head experiment. No. This one just... Chances are, I imagine you've heard of this vaguely. So this is an attempt to transplant a monkey head onto another monkey's body. So head transplants on animals had been a thing since the early 1900s, but our story here is going to begin with Robert J. Wyatt in the famous 1970s year, 1965. Focusing on brain transplants, Dr. White came up with autoperfusion, a method with which to transplant brains without limiting the blood flow, which would basically kill the brain during or just after the experiment. While this method was often successful, it would often leave dogs with at best 2 days to survive after a transplant. Using 8 rhesus monkeys, Dr. White used this autoperfusion technique in 1970, separating pairs of monkeys' heads from the 4th and 5th cerebral vertebrae. And so the heads between the monkeys were swapped. The monkeys actually survived the initial surgery, reacting to stimulus, eating food, and being visibly scared shitless. The monkeys survived for up to 6 to 36 hours before they died of blood loss and drugs. Now, despite how fucked this experiment was, the surgery did prove that a head transplant was theoretically possible amongst humans, and did help to further transplant science across just general human history. And in fact, to this day, we've even managed to go from these experiments to a successful mouse head transplant where the subject survived for 6 months. So there is a bright side to this, at least, with how important it has been for furthering the medical field. So, At least unlike quite a lot of screwed up science experiments I've heard of, this one has a tangible and meaningful effect. The surrogate mother experiment. Oh, flashbacks to my psychology course right now. This is a half fascinating experiment and a half what are you doing experiment. The experiment was done to examine the psychological relationships between infants and mothers, using monkeys instead of humans. This experiment was done by Dr. Harry Frederick Harlow. Harlow wanted to do intelligence tests on monkeys, so he set up Reese's macaque breeding colonies to get access to more of them. Controversially, he separated the mothers from their children, as he found it difficult to perform tests on infant monkeys with their mother around. What he noticed, however, was that the monkeys taken away from their mothers would develop differently to monkeys with mothers, taking comfort in their cloth diaper cage linings, and when those diapers were removed, they would suffer extreme mental anguish. This led to the question of the psychological needs of monkeys, because while these infants were being taken care of entirely from a physical point of view, Harlow thought that the way the infants came out was a result of a lack of a maternal figure, cueing the surrogate mother experiment. 1957, Harlow made a monkey-shaped wireframe and covered it in a cloth. But then he parted them into two different mothers. Both had a light bulb to produce warmth, and a teat to produce milk, but one was a wireframe and the other a block of wood with cloth and sponge around it. They were placed in two cages, each with 4 monkeys. In one cage, only the wireframe could lactate milk, and in the other one, only the cloth mother could lactate milk. Unsurprisingly, in the cage with the lactating cloth mother, the wireframe mother was basically completely ignored. In the other cage, however, infants would feed from the wireframe, but then spend the rest of the time in the comfort of the cloth mother. For the control group, monkeys were given just one mother and didn't have a choice. So then what Harlow did was bring fear in, and when bringing in something scary, monkeys in the test group would always go towards the surrogate cloth mother over the wireframe. After some time clinging to the cloth mother, they would actually gain the confidence to approach the scary thing. More experiments were performed, distressing the monkeys in multiple ways that always led to them returning to the cloth mother, even when separated for a long time from those cloth mothers. These tests proved at the time the necessity of comfort from a parental figure when rearing a child, to which the understanding of was greatly aided by this experiment. Unfortunately, it also caused certain test subjects to become especially socially distant and distressed. And all infants were exposed to fear stimulus on a repeated basis. But this is far from the worst Harlow did with monkeys, and I am very hoping that his future experiments don't show up here. The Ape and the Child Experiment. This story is about Gaia, a chimpanzee who was forcibly removed from her mother's cage at the age of 7 months and sent to a human family with 2 parents and a brother. This was an experiment of nature versus nurture, to see if a chimp's nature would change if it was raised like a human. The son Donald was basically used as a part of this experiment, to see the differences between how he ended up and how Gaia ended up. Now you might be thinking either, well that's not so bad, or, well that's pretty fucked up. But if you're in either camp, then hold on to that horse you're raising, because it gets worse. To test the difference between hardening of their skulls, the parents just straight up thwacked them with spoons to see if they could hear a difference. To test reaction time, they record the children reacting to a sudden gunshot behind them. Now, Gaia for a while was doing pretty well, aside from those just lovely experiments. She was picking things up fairly well, she was imitating human behaviors, and she got along well with her new brother. But then came language development, which obviously wasn't as good for Gaia. She could learn to react to about 95 words, but she wasn't able to speak in the same way Donald was. Donald eventually came to develop some vocal and social issues, and by the 9th month of the experiment, Gaia was kicked out and sent back, where she continued to be the subject of experiments and die less than a year after the conclusion. This experiment got scrutinized for both how it treated Gaia and Donald, with Gaia being ripped from her comforting home twice, and Donald's development being stunted. Donald would eventually sadly take his own life at the age of 43, and we will never know whether this experiment had any impact on the reason for his actions. In general, this is a story that, despite some sweet moments, is kind of just tragic all around. The 1904 Olympics Marathon. Another of the funniest things on this layer that me and Huand have memed maliciously. So let's just get to the marathon. There were 32 runners from 4 nations, including Frederick Laws, a bricklayer, 10 Greek contestants who had never run a marathon before, 2 South Africans who showed up with no shoes, and a Cuban mailman who asked people for money to sponsor him to go to this event, wherein he used that sponsored money to promptly go to New Orleans and drank and gambled it away and hiked the rest of the way to the marathon, arriving in a long sleeve shirt, a beret, full-length trousers, and hiking boots right at the start of the race. Yeah. So what happened in the race? Well, the event organizers decided to drive cars a few meters in front of the racers, causing a shitload of dust to be blasted into the runners, and that asphyxiated them pretty badly. Thankfully, they had a ton of water stops they had one water stop 6 miles in, and then none after. So one man had nearly fatal internal hemorrhaging, one man started vomiting, one man was chased off course by a pack of wild dogs, and somehow the number 2 place was a Cuban in the weird clothes who stopped to talk to people on the way. He then grabbed 2 peaches without permission and ran the fuck away from the people he just stole from. And then, ever the free eater, he went and took some apples from an orchard and started eating those too. They were rotten, and his solution to the stomach cramps was to take a goddamn nap in the middle of a race, of a marathon. So who was in the lead? Frederick Laws, the bricklayer, who also got stomach cramps and decided to get a lift from a car for 11 miles. He then got out and ran the last 4.85, arriving in 3 hours and 13 minutes. He had won! But no, they found out he cheated. He took a car for 11 miles. Now, why was this event so fucked? Well, James E. Sullivan, the event organizer, turned this entire event into a goddamn experiment on the effects of forced dehydration. Yeah, he thought that it would benefit the racers to dehydrate them. Then came Thomas Hicks, the actual winner, dehydrated as hell, wanting water and being refused it, with a warm and damp sponge in his mouth, and being made to drink a mixture of egg white and strychnine. Yes, strychnine, one of the most horrible poisons to die from, because back then they thought in small doses it was a stimulant that enhanced an athlete's performance. So how did he win after being fucked up by poison? Well, he was dragged by his handlers, got near the end, got a second wind, and then they poisoned him a second time with some brandy as well. And Hicks, hallucinating, barely got there, carried over the finish line by his handlers, injured from death. And the man who had fallen asleep in the race, yeah, he was 3rd place. What a ridiculous event. Earth can't be real. The Overton Bridge. This is the bridge that dogs kill themselves on. Earliest reported in 1995, this bridge in Scotland has led to over 300 dogs jumping off the bridge, with at least 50 dying. Some dogs even survived the fall, limping back up, and then allegedly throw themselves off again. Why is this? Well, we don't know. There are some explanations people have proposed though. David Sands, a canine psychologist, suggests that there was a very strong odor of mice, squirrels, and minks that attracted dogs to want to jump off, and the thick foliage makes it seem like the fall isn't as big as it is to them. And the other explanations are demons. Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage is known to me as one of the most important case studies in psychology history. To those who don't know, Phineas Gage was a railroad construction foreman who, on September 13th, 1848, suffered an accident wherein an explosive went off at just the right angle to launch an iron rod straight through the side of Gage's face and out the top of his head. The accident destroyed most of his frontal lobe, but despite that, Gage got up not long after the accident and started talking with minimal assistance. Naturally, this baffled people, and led to countless studies on the importance of the frontal lobe and how the brain works. Famously, Gage was cited as having had major changes as to how he acted, and the kind of person he was before and after the accident. Prior, he was cited as hard-working, responsible, and efficient, but after the event he was impatient, obstinate, and overall irresponsible. Essentially, he was seen as a completely different person, and remains to this day a very important topic of psychology, as a case study that obviously we cannot recreate ethically to observe a second time. Vladimir Demikov. I'm going to pronounce the name with complete confidence. Demikov is the name of the Soviet scientist most known for the time he made a 2-headed dog. Coiner of the term transplantology, Demikov was a pioneer of transplants, especially amongst dogs, and so in the 1950s went about performing 24 dog head transplants, the most famous of which was his 24th, wherein he cut a dog named Shavka in half and stitched her onto the body of a German shepherd named Brodyaga. After a 3.5-hour process, the 2-headed dog was alive, responsive to stimulus and able to eat. She also died in 4 days' time because of the damage to a vein in the neck, and that's the end of that story. Becca. Jesus! Am I the only one who finds this image haunting? Well anyway, Becca is the possible name of a woman who was found hanging in a motel shower, and has never been identified. Well, not for certain. 3rd of June 1991, a man named Eduardo Colon arrived at the Super 8 motel in New Mexico. He rented a room for 2 people for 1 night, and that was all good, until he didn't check out, and so a security guard went to check in on him. The room was locked from the inside, and so he had to use a screwdriver to get in, and what he found in the room was a woman hanging from the shower. She was found hung with a suitcase strap and with heroin in her system, and was severely decomposed. What was found with her was a photograph of what we believe to have been her, with a man identified as Eduardo. Except Eduardo's family was later tracked down years after his death, and they had no idea who she or the man in the photo were, and so while the death was ruled as a self-nucification, we cannot confirm who she is or who the man in the photo with her is. In March 2021, a tip was announced by investigators to have suggested that her name was Becca and that she was from Los Angeles County, but nothing has come of this that I could find, but that's basically where we got her name from. Julian Assange. Julian was a fellow Aussie cunt like me, and most famous for being the founder of WikiLeaks, a news-leaking media organization from 2006 that published multiple documents across a long span of time that were incredibly notable for the content within. Now, the link on the iceberg leads to a private video, so I'm not certain what specifically about him was intended to be the subject of this part of the iceberg, but I can only assume it would be his legal issues, or maybe the fact that he's the founder of WikiLeaks, but to avoid getting this totally wrong, I'll just not bother. This video is already huge, don't judge me. What existed before the Big Bang? This is of course the question of, if the Big Bang was the start of everything, what came before it? Well, obviously we don't know. Theories range from absolutely nothing, as time didn't exist yet, so you can't have a before, to God, the Abrahamic one, he will let there be light, that was the Big Bang, or a singularity containing all matter that currently exists, or maybe even the possibility they will live in a cyclical universe with no start or end, but rather everything is a constant cycle. Before our Big Bang was the end of the last universe, and before that one's Big Bang was the universe before that, and there's no end for our one. It will just lead to a big crunch that'll lead to another Big Bang. Which gave me a headache to think about, so let's move on. Grave robbing for morons! Oh hey, grave robbing lessons for me! Anyway, grave robbing for morons is way too low on the iceberg because a shitload of people know what this is, and yet no one knows anything. Supposedly, back in the 90s, a VHS tape was circulated by the name Ensuring Your Place in Hell, which contained 4 half-hour-long videos in it. Mortuary of the Dead, Cooking with Huck Botko, Exploding Vermins, and most famously, Grave Robbing for Morons. The short film depicts a man who calls himself Anthony Cass something, but he doesn't finish, giving details and a tutorial on how to rob graves. To this day, we have no idea who he is, what this video is, or whether it's real or a hoax. With the exception of Cooking with Huck Botko, we aren't entirely certain of any of these films as to if they're real. That one we know is fake because Robert Botko is a known film producer though. Now where do we start? So the film itself isn't really that unusual. I mean, it is in the sense that he's basically talking to a camera about how to rob graves, but nothing crazy happens. There's no ghosts or murdering. There's nothing over the top, which has led to a lot of people believing it could be real. There are reasons people are given for why it's real and why it's a hoax, and I can share those below and let you decide. Some people believe it to be real for the following reasons. The main one is that they think the skull looks very real and the remains look like actual human remains. Combined with the dirt on them and the dirt on Anthony's hands, it makes it seem like he just pulled the skull straight out of the ground. There's also the advice he gives, which a lot of people think is genuine. On the other hand, people have pointed out that the advice he gives for things like cleaning the skulls and especially how to deal with witnesses are absolutely idiotic and do not work. They are processes that don't make sense to do, especially how to deal with witnesses by knocking them out and then assuming that they're going to think it was just a dream. Also, maybe don't talk about dealing with witnesses while showing your face on camera, idiot. Well, I guess we've never identified him, so maybe we're the idiots. Anyway, even if this skull was real, there is the fact that getting a real skull as a prop is not necessarily as hard as it seems. If Anthony knew someone who was involved in the medical field, he could easily have gotten his hands on a skull, apparently. The film is believed to have been directed by Christopher Boucher, which is even credited on the film's IMDb page, because he sold the tape on his website, with custom artwork for it. Case solved, right? Film's fake. Wrong. Christopher was born in 1987, and I think a toddler would really struggle to direct a film, you know? And we know it was in 1987, I'll explain that later. There's also the Red Hook theory, which I can only find in Hannah the Horrible's video, and not like anywhere else really, and I couldn't really get much on it. One theory is that this guy, who credits himself as Anthony Cass something, is Anthony Casamasima. However, there are a few problems with this. The main one is that for this to be Anthony Casamasima, he would have had to have been 28 at the time of filming this, probably older, as we do know when the actual Casamasima was born. But this guy doesn't really look 28, does he? Also, Anthony was known to have robbed items from graves, but not the actual corpses, which is a bit contradictory to what this Anthony says. A theory also exists that this tape was inspired by the case of Ricky Casso, who killed his friend for a supposed satanic ritual, did some grave robbing, and wanted to take a skull. Supposedly, and that was the topic of the book Say You Love Satan. It is believed that due to some things Anthony says and the timeline of events that there's a connection. Now the reason we have an idea on the timeline of this is because the film Evil Dead 2 actually shows up in Grave Robbing for Morons, so we know it at least was filmed in 1987, potentially later, and we know that likely Anthony Cass lives in or around New York as he talks about digging up Houdini who was buried there, which all connects, but here's the thing, it tells us nothing. We know basically nothing about Grave Robbing for Morons, we cannot confirm truly even the date it was made, we don't know if it was real or fake, we don't know who Anthony Cass is, so the conclusion here is, the butterfly effect. Wait, really? So, okay, the butterfly effect is the idea that a single butterfly's wing flaps may cause tiny changes that spiral all the way until it causes, prevents, or alters the formation of a tornado in the distance. I probably explained that way too quickly, but it's a concept in chaos theory that small changes in the starting conditions of an event could have massive changes in the long run. Think that if you have two planes traveling a very long distance, if one of them is 1 degree to the left compared to the other one, they will be very far away from each other after a couple hours of flying. The distance will be massive. It is a theory that will fucking kill any overthinker, and there are examples of it, though not necessarily as dramatic as the butterfly one. The butterfly effect can often be applied retroactively to almost any event, and at some point you will reach a condition that seems very small but was significant in the future. Let's say you choose not to go on a walk down the road that you were planning on because some cool Australian YouTuber posted an hour-long Iceberg video that you wanted to watch at home instead. Because you did not go out, you did not bump into a young man on the street that you would have bumped into. Because you did not bump into that man, he wasn't momentarily halted. Because he wasn't momentarily halted, he ended up crossing the road too soon and was hit by a car. Because he got hit by a car, police got involved in the accident. As a result of police getting involved, the car driver was investigated and found to have been a serial murderer who escaped law enforcement several years ago. In this hypothetical, if you choose to go on that walk and watch the video later, that man would not have been hit by a car, police would not have gotten involved, and a serial murderer would have continued to escape custody. That sort of stuff, you know? Don't think too much about it, you'll just hurt yourself. Ball Lightning. Ball Lightning is one of my personal favourite cards in Wizards of the Coast Magic the Gathering, a 3-mana 6/1 with haste and trample that blows itself up at the end of the turn. Nowadays, I'm not really certain of how good it is in the modern meta. I can imagine some people might think it's just a bit slow, but back when I was younger, it was a really fun card to just slam into people for large sums of damage, and a wonderful card to have bowl you over when you don't have an instant to blow it up before it can hit you. It's also named after a real-life phenomenon. It's a rare and genuinely unexplained one in which a spherical object that glows, described as between pea-size to several meters across, are seen and often depicted and attested to blast through windows and explode. While similar to St. Elmo's fire, it is believed to be a separate phenomenon. Many historical attestations of the phenomena exist. Considered the earliest is the 1195 Chronicle of Gervasii of Canterbury, which describes a dense cloud emitting a white spherical substance later fell towards the river. Later accounts include those by Aleister Crowley and Tsar Nicholas II. One was even recorded in June of 2022. A 1972 review claimed the following as the properties of ball lightning, which you can just read on screen if you want, because I'm not going to read it all out. But to this day, there is no single widely accepted scientific explanation for ball lightning. Theories range from it being an electrically charged solid core, or that when lightning strikes Earth it separates oxygen from silicon dioxide and turns it into pure silicon vapor, something is connected directly to microwave radiation, and so much more, but none of them are agreed upon by everyone or even by a large group of people. My theory, you guessed it, I think it's probably Goku, Jack Frawaisei. Jack Frawaisei was a man that died, and for most people that's the end of the story. You're born, you live, you die, maybe you have a legacy. But something else was happening with Frawaisei, when one of his close friends got an email from him after his passing, which included within it an in-joke between the two. After that, his cousin got an email as well. Unsurprisingly, these are pretty odd occurrences, and people have had many theories on what happened. People thought maybe Frawaisei was communicating from beyond the grave through the email, that someone had access to his email account and was just being an asshole, or that he had some kind of preset emails that were scheduled somehow to send after his death. And of course, the theory that this was made up by the family for attention, which I hope isn't the case. But we don't know, and both of those things are my catchphrases for this series. Luis Jimenez. Remember when I talked about the Denver airport and Lucifer, like in one of the last videos? I think I mentioned how it killed its creator. This is the creator. Age 65, 2006, a chunk of Lucifer fell on him, pinned him, and severed an artery, and he died. Chung Eng Bunker. These two are the conjoined twins that inspired the term Siamese twins. From birth, these two were connected at the sternum. Back then, the procedure to separate them would have most likely killed them as well. Their discovery is credited to the Scottish merchant Robert Hunter, who saw them swimming and saw the dollar signs attributed to being able to exploit them as sideshow freaks. They went with him, toured, and then went their separate ways, as in separate from Robert, not from each other obviously. They got married, had kids, and then died having fathered a total of 21 children. Charles Sherwood Stratton. Also known as General Tom Thumb, Charles was a boy who didn't grow any larger once he hit the age of 5 months, and stood a whopping 25 inches tall as a teenager. He was hired by P.T. Barnum at the age of 4 to sing, dance, and make a fool of himself to get money. Barnum lied that Charles was 11 years old, and the two actually were quite good friends, and would play many roles on the stage, earning his family a very large salary, at least for the times in the 1840s. It got to the point where he even performed in front of Queen Victoria and got married to a similarly small woman, Lavinia Warren, who would perform with him in front of motherfucking Abraham Lincoln. They retired in the 1880s, had a mansion built with furniture sized just for them, and Charles died of a stroke in 1883. If you're wondering, Lavinia continued living to 1919, and indeed remarried, and then eventually passed as well. Normally these stories have some sort of dark side to them, but these two are actually pretty positive. Fanny Mills. This one also doesn't have a working link. Fanny Mills is an incredibly unfortunate name, but that was indeed the name of a woman with just massive feet. Known as the Ohio Bigfoot Girl, she performed between the years of 1885 and 1887, because of course she did. She suffered from Milroy's disease, causing swelling in her lower limbs, reportedly giving her feet that were 19 inches long, and so she was a dime museum performer. Which she continued on until she retired in 1892, and later died at the too young age of 39. Frank Latini. Francesco Latini, Am I getting crazy Mandela effect? I feel like I've done this one before. Anyway, Frank Latini was a man born with a twin, but as you can see, the twin was born with him. He came out with 3 legs and an extra foot on the knee of one of them. Now, Latini couldn't get his extra leg removed because it was too close to his spine to be safely taken off, and his parents, being as lovingly unaccepting as they were, sent him off to live with his aunt. Despite this, Latini never actually let his extra leg get him down. He learned to run, swim, and drive and all that, and of course, perform in a circus. He would eventually pass in 1966, having lived honestly a pretty good life, and kind of an inspiring one. He accepted what he had and he made the most of it. Good on him. Myrtle Corbin. Are we sure I haven't done this one already too? Well, Josephine Myrtle Corbin was born in 1868 on May the 2nd in Tennessee. She was completely normal, except for the fact that she had 4 legs. When she was 13, she of course got sent into a sideshow circuit, and even after she was gone, a bunch of fakes came out to emulate her success. She wasn't born this way because of a twin like old Latini, but rather she had a condition known as dipygus that caused her lower abdomen to be duplicated at birth, resulting in 2 sets of legs and 2 pelvises. At the age of 19, she married a man and had 5 children, and she died at the age of 59. Her casket was washed to make sure it was concreted without any grave robbers being able to get into it as well. Jackson Emmett Buell. Jackson Buell was a child born in 2014 who was known for having had 80% of his brain missing at birth due to microhydranencephaly. He was predicted to only survive 1 year, but he lived to the age of 5 before he sadly passed in 2020. Fee Fi Fo Fum and Fooey. These are the names given to 5 mice who were sent to the moon and circled around it 75 times in 1972 on the Apollo 17 mission. Their actual names given were like A3305, but the Apollo 17 crew was sensible enough to not do that and just gave them nicknames that are memorable. 4 males and 1 female orbited the moon for 6 days and 4 hours, along with Ronald Evans, one of the crewmates. The 3 people and 5 mice on that vessel were the last living things from Earth to ever travel to and orbit the moon, and the mice and Evans share the records of both longest time spent in lunar orbit and most orbits traveled. Happy ending, right? Hell nah, the mice were euthanized and dissected, except for one of them who died in space. Oscar. Oscar is a horrific fish from the iconic South Korean nationalist propaganda film Shark Tale, played by YouTuber Marcus Fishbarker, who cheated in a shark massacre speedrun for 3 years until he was exposed by the community into a large scandal that was later covered by fellow YouTuber Carlson Jobs. That, or it's referring to the therapy cat who lived from 2005 to 2022, who seemed to be able to predict the passing of terminally ill patients, by which I mean he would nap next to them for a few hours before they died. It's believed this ability was a result of Oscar either noticing a lack of movement in the patients, or being able to smell chemicals released around the time of death. But the most sensible explanation is probably confirmation bias. They didn't actually have an ability, but rather because we looked for proof that he did, we found it instead of being unbiased in our approach. After all, predicting 100 deaths is a lot, but maybe he did have mystical powers, maybe he was Garfield or something. The Great Attractor. No, this is not a lost film about a man with a Dave Bautista-sized member. This is a supposed gravitational attraction in space that is the apparent central gravitational point of the Laniakea supercluster, which is the supercluster that includes our own Milky Way galaxy. We can't be certain of it, but we believe there is a localized concentration of mass millions of times denser than that of the Milky Way that is obscured behind our galaxy's galactic plane that stops us from being able to observe it directly. That's really all I can say that makes sense to people like me. We believe there's a big center point to the supercluster that our galaxy is in, but we can't observe it and confirm it exists. Timothy Treadwell audio. On October 5th, 2003, a grizzly bear mauled to death Timothy Treadwell and Amy Huguenard, I hope that's how it's pronounced, while they were camping in a national park. While this event wasn't recorded visually, their camera was on for the whole event, just with the lens cap attached, giving us 6 minutes of audio recorded during the attack that began and ended in the middle of the mauling. Obviously, this audio has not been released to the public. There are fakes out there, but they're not the real thing according to people who have access to the audio, and honestly, who wants to listen to it? Christine Chubbuck Cyanide. That's not what it says, but it vaguely rhymes with what the word is, and you know what that word is. In 1974, Christine Chubbuck ended a long battle with depression on live television using a firearm. Christine had actually asked about how to do it before air, and joked about doing it on air as well. Or so it seemed, because it wasn't a joke. Christine had attempted to end herself with an overdose prior to this event, and nobody knew it until, well, after the show went live. Obviously, we do not have this footage. It's not known if anyone had filmed it at home, though it's unlikely because it was just a news broadcast. But an injunction from her family has made it impossible for the tape to be released. In fact, it's believed that they destroyed it after they got their hands on it. It was believed to have been found when the video by Nation Squid seemed to include it, but no, that was fake. In early 2021, it is believed that genuine audio from the incident have been found and uploaded, but the video has since been privated. Perhaps it can still be found somewhere on the internet, but I don't want to go looking. This is not something to sensationalize, and honestly, I hope the audio is lost, I hope the video is lost, for the sake of her and her family. Okiku the Doll. A supposed haunted doll from Japan, Okiku's legend begins in 1918, when a Japanese man would buy a doll for his 2-year-old sister, whose name was, well, Okiku. A year later, Okiku would pass some yellow fever at the age of 3. The doll was her favourite toy and she loved it, but the family wasn't allowed to bury it with her like they intended. The doll was placed in the family altar, and weird things started to happen. It was noticed that the doll's hair was growing, and then after dreaming of Okiku, the doll would appear by their bedside. Soon they'd experience flashing lights, banging in the house, and voices with no origins. Shamans confirmed that the daughter's soul was trapped within the doll, and the family was okay with that, I guess. The doll apparently resides currently in a private shrine in Hokkaido where you can go bug her if you want. Steve Irwin's stingray attack footage. No, I don't want to talk about this, but I will, for you. Steve Irwin is one of my personal heroes, one of those people I've looked up to since I was a wee lad, like David Attenborough. In 2006, Steve Irwin was fatally attacked by a stingray, and the whole event from when it happened to the aftermath was most likely filmed. It's said that this footage was destroyed by the Irwin family, but who knows for certain. I personally never want to see it, and I hope it's lost forever, or at best, held by the Irwin family only and never to be released publicly. Death of Brandon Lee. Oh, come on! The son of famous martial artist Bruce Lee, Brandon is perhaps best well known for his tragically first and last lead performance in the iconic 1994 cult film The Crow. In the middle of a stunt wherein Brandon, as the character, was to be unaffected by bullets, and thus guns were said to fire blanks on him, an incident occurred. An earlier shot was jammed into the barrel of one of the guns, and when fired a second time, it actually launched the casing into Brandon, eventually leading to his passing later that day. The whole incident was caught on camera and was allegedly destroyed by the director, but also allegedly a cameraman claimed to own a copy of the footage. Either way, it has never been released and likely will stay that way. Chris Farley's Shrek audio. Someone probably just chuckled because I mentioned the name Shrek, but this is not funny. Initially, comedian Chris Farley was set to play the role of Shrek, with 80 to 90% of his dialogue recorded, but he would die of a drug overdose at the age of 33 before he could finish. Eventually, the whole performance was redone by Mike Myers, and then redone again by Mike Myers, but this time he was Scottish. We don't know much about the Farley version of Shrek, except that Shrek himself would have been a very different character. The audio of this performance also is mostly lost, with only a 2.5-minute scene being released by producer John Garbett on Vimeo. I'll play a little just for you, but you can find this on YouTube pretty easily.
Oh, this is another one of those onion things.
No, this is one of those drop it and leave me alone things.
Well, why don't you want to talk about it?
Why do you want to talk about it?
Well, why are you answering the question with a question?
Why are you asking questions I don't want to answer?
Why are you blocking?
I'm not blocking.
Then why do you have problems expressing your wants?
I don't. I want you to shut up. See? No problem.
You're just displacing your anger.
Believe me, it's properly placed.
You're really mad at whoever did this to you.
No one did anything to me.
Yes. Someone hurt you so bad. Someone hurt you many years ago.
Leave my parents out of this!
Breakthrough!
Mickey Mouse in Vietnam. Okay, no, this one kind of is as funny as the name. In 1968, Lee Savage, father of That Savage, no, not that one, this one, produced a silent film named Short Subject, also known to us as Mickey Mouse in Vietnam. This was an anti-war film where Mickey happily strolls into war and immediately eats shit. It was believed lost since 1970, but by 2013 we had the video, and by 2018 we got the audio too, so yeah, not lost anymore and hasn't been for a while. White hole. So imagine a black hole, but the opposite. It cannot be entered, but it can be escaped. These are purely hypothetical, unlike black holes, and first suggested in 1964 by Igor Novikov. There's a lot of crazy explanations and reasonings for them, but basically media likes to depict them as, when you enter a black hole, you go out a white hole. They're just the inverse of a black hole that poops stuff out. Lake Anjakuni disappearance. Oh yeah, back to disappearances. Whoa! This one refers to the mass disappearance of an entire tribe in Canada. In 1930, the Paz reported a small Inuit village was off to the right of Lake Anjakuni that had regularly welcomed fur trappers. In the same year, however, Joe LaBelle, a fur trapper known in the village, found that all the villagers were gone. He found the village deserted, with food hanging over fire pits and shirts that hadn't been finished, 7 dogs dead of starvation, and a grave having been dug up. Nobody from this village would ever be found. However, in 1931, Sergeant J. Nelson of the Paz filed an internal report that would go public, stating that he could find no foundation for the story. He even said that Joe LaBelle, a supposed known fur trapper, had only just gotten his first license for it in that year, and questioned if he had even gone to those territories he claimed to have. Nowadays, this story has been considered an urban legend and brushed off, with no evidence of the village's existence, and that it was a fantastical story when it was published, with even the photos in the article being dated to 1909 and not 1930 when this supposedly happened. If you want an explanation beyond that it was all nonsense from the start, well, I've got one for you. Aliens! Yeah! Virginia Carpenter. So this is a 21-year-old woman. You've probably never seen one of these before if you're a fan of my channel. Her name is Virginia Carpenter. We don't know what happened to her, I know, real shocker on this iceberg, but on the 1st of June 1948, Virginia boarded a train to travel to where she could begin her summer classes, and when she arrived, she got into a cab. Apparently called the two men parked out the front of her destination, a driver drove off, and she was never heard from again. She never checked into her dormitory. We don't know the identity of the two men that her driver Zachary reported she said would help her with her luggage. Her boyfriend and the driver were both contacted after she went missing, and they determined that she had no reason to run away, so it's considered that she had been taken by those two men. Zachary and his wife had a solid alibi for each other, but that changed in 1957 when his now ex-wife revealed that she had lied about the situation. But when Zachary was brought back, he passed multiple polygraph tests and was never charged. It would then pass in 1984. In the following months, there were many reported sightings of her, matching her description usually. One in particular from a ticket agent identified her and said she was fidgety and visibly nervous when a man appeared and whisked her away into the night. Later on that very day, the agent received a phone call asking if Virginia Carpenter happened to be at that station. However, like with all other sightings, this one couldn't technically be confirmed. The case went cold and she was legally declared dead in 1955. Since then, police have received multiple tips, but nothing conclusive. It has been speculated that this is connected to the Phantom Killer from Virginia's homeland, an unidentified killer who murdered 5 people, 3 of which were associates of Virginia. We may never know if there's actually a connection, or who those 2 mysterious men are, whether the ticket agent's report was real, or of course what happened to Virginia, leaving this as just another haunting case study of how being a woman is terrifying. Asher Degree. In the year 2000, the 9-year-old Asher Degree vanished from her home in North Carolina. Tucked in a bed, a nearby car accident caused the neighborhood to lose power, and at that point her father had found her still in her bed. Her older brother slept in the same room as her, reporting to police that he heard some creaking from her bed, but assumed it was just her moving around in her sleep. When the 4-hour period of when she was checked on by her father at 2:30 a.m. to when she was discovered missing at 6:30 a.m., something happened that caused her to vanish from her bed. There was no sign of forced entry, and her school bag had been taken as well. Investigators heard reports that witnesses saw her on the Highway 18 at 4 a.m., but she bolted into the woods when they approached. And that was the last truly confirmed sighting of Asher. Over 8 days, nothing was found of her except for a hair bow in a nearby shed. It took a year and a half when the next lead would come up, when her backpack was found in 2001 containing a book checked out from her library, but that didn't go anywhere. So they walked to 2004 when a prison inmate claimed that she had been killed and knew where she was, as in where she was buried, but investigators only found animal bones. To this day, we still don't know what happened to her, why she ran off, or where she is or ended up. Her parents believe her to still be alive, and I hope that's the case, and that she can be found someday and this can be resolved. Timothy Pitson. In 2011, 6-year-old Timothy Pitson was dropped off at school by his father, and later picked up by his mother where she took him on a 3-day trip to amusement parks and water parks. When I put it that way, it might seem innocent, but it was anything but. Timothy's parents, Amy Fry Pitson and James Pitson, were fighting, and Amy believed that she was bound for a 4th divorce, one that would lead her to not gaining custody of the son that she loved more than anything. Amy called her family members during this trip, aside from her husband, saying that Timothy was safe but also hers. Amy had been seen with Timothy on camera for a lot of their trip, however her last sightings didn't have him there, and she would later pass in a hotel room that she had booked for only 1 day. Her body was found with gashes in her wrists and neck, and she was found with a lethal amount of drugs in her body. She had ended herself. A note that apologized to her loved ones was there, but unsettlingly, it also said that Timothy was safe, but also would never be found again. Timothy was never found again, at least until 2019, when a boy appeared claiming to be Timothy. However, after blood tests, this boy was actually revealed to be a 23-year-old man named Brian Michael Rinne, who was sentenced to 2 years in prison in 2020 for identity theft. There are a lot of theories as to what might have happened, the biggest one being that Timothy was murdered by his own mother. In Amy's vehicle, police found, quote, a concerning amount, unquote, of blood, and that when she said Timothy was safe, she meant that he was in heaven. The car was also determined to have been recently parked once in a grassy area, leading investigators to believe that he was likely buried somewhere where nobody would look. The clothes that Amy was wearing when she left the hotel the last time she was seen with him were also never found. But this isn't the only theory, and there's evidence against it too, like a lack of motive and footage showing that she wasn't in any kind of emotional rage or drug-addled state, and the blood likely could have been from one of Timothy's frequent nosebleeds that he apparently had. Though as someone who also can get frequent nosebleeds, I have never had a concerning amount of blood come out of one. Other theories include that Jim was an abusive father and that she took Timothy away from him and made him run off with a new identity, or that she had had an affair and Timothy wasn't Jim's actual son, so she took him to be raised by his actual father, or that he was illegally adopted through Amy to either a nice family or a remote Amish community or a cult, or any number of things apparently. We can't be certain of course, but maybe there'll be an answer to that one day. Poe Toaster. So, Poe Toaster is the hilarious name given to an unidentified person or peoples who for several decades paid annual tributes to the cenotaph marking the original gravesite of author Edgar Allan Poe. In the early hours of January 19, the individual was known to have worn a lot of black with a wide brim hat and white scarf, where they poured a glass of cognac, raised a toast in Poe's honour, and promptly sod off into the night, leaving 3 roses in a particular arrangement, as well as the unfinished bottle. Onlookers would start gathering annually to catch a glimpse of the toaster, what a sentence, who was rarely seen or photographed. According to eyewitness reports, the toaster began these visits in the 1930s up until the final one in 2009, the 160th anniversary of Poe's passing. It is believed that the toaster actually died in 1998 and passed on the tradition to their child, with notes being left from the post-1998 toaster that failed to help identify them. These notes would have messages like, "Edgar, I haven't forgotten you," and "The torch will be passed." And one in 1998 even claimed that the original toaster had died. In 2007, a 92-year-old named Sam Popora stated that he had begun the tradition as a publicity stunt to reinvigorate the Baltimore's Westminster Church, and that it all began in 1949, but this is generally agreed to be a crock of shite. In 2015, the Maryland Historical Society picked a new person to be the Poe Toaster to continue the tradition from then on, who first appeared in 2016. Obviously, we don't know the origins of this person, who they were, or anything about them, but it's honestly one of the neatest things on this iceberg. Taos Hum. This is Taos. Teos. It's a little town in north-central New Mexico. Sometimes, it hums! First reported in the early 1990s, 2% of the population of the place claimed they could hear the hum, but after extensive testing, nothing was detected. Except that actually, there were several unrelated hums instead of a single constant one. Dun dun dun! Don't know what causes them, and that's all there is. Enrique's. Enrique's is a weird, zacky, wacky website. Called enriques.angelflyer.com, it appears as a website that's mostly written in Thai that talks about a disease called Enrique's. Or Enrique's. Fuck off. The way this website works is that the more you click on this woman's face, the more distorted the page gets until, oh, hey, look, a smiley face, that's nice. This page is called Help and tells you please wake up, but also no thank you. That's nice. If you click the Enrique's page, you get a page with a key and Zolgified text. You can then click Bypass Login in the bottom left to see a page that says the dream is ending to someone called Tyler, and a video that's this lovely thing. Click the contact page and you get nothing. What's up with this page? I don't know! Someone on Reddit reverse image searched the woman on the front page and found the name to be Dr. Marley Polunuek, a prostodontist, but she has nothing to do with this, I'd imagine. Also, this video, it's from an ARG related to the show Lost, and this Enrique's website has no evidence linking it to Lost. Apparently you can access a PDF file through the website that's over 100 pages in Thai and about mental health. I don't know any more about it, nobody else seems to either. Heartbeat in the Brain. What the fuck is this? Okay, apparently Heartbeat in the Brain is a 1970 Lost documentary film, produced and directed by Amanda Fielding, advocating for trepidation. Which, if you don't know, is a medical procedure by which a hole is drilled into a patient's skull that has existed all the way back since the Neolithic era. It is obviously an extremely risky procedure, though a trained neurosurgeon can more or less do it without major harm. Self-trepidation is very, very bad though, and it was last screened in 2011. So it's not really lost media, it's just not publicly available media. And that, my friends, is the end of part 1 of Tier 4. This is a huge tier, like the last one with over 100 entries. I'll get part 2, hopefully within less than 6 months of when this one comes out, but